house for the holiday. I'd realized there were a couple of decorations in the shed in the backyard that I needed, so I decided to go get them. It was 9 o'clock in the evening, and it was raining. I live in the suburbs against the hills, so it gets really dark at night. I'm rummaging around in the shed. There's no light in the shed, so I have a flashlight, and I start to hear murmuring. Bear in mind, it's the evening, it's dark, and it's raining, so nobody should be in their backyards. I stop moving around in the shed to listen to the voices, and once I stop moving, they also stop. I pause a few seconds, and then I start moving around again in the shed. As soon as I start moving again, the voices start back up. I walk to the shed door and stick my head out. Hello, I say. Silence. The only sound is the rain dripping off the roof. I pause and listen. I don't hear the neighbors in their yards, and all their porch lights are off. Everyone appears to be in bed because the lights are also off in all the houses around me. Suddenly, I hear several voices say, "Does she know? Does she know? Does she know?" They're saying it quietly and so fast, over and over. Does she know? Does she know? Does she know? I said, "Who's there?" And the voices stop. I'm spooked, so I quickly shut the shed door and practically run back inside. Later that evening, my son's alarm clock goes off at midnight, and at 2 a.m., nobody set the alarm. When we woke up the next morning, all the picture frames in the house were crooked. So some incongruous facts or events there, but altogether makes it creepy, I think. This one is untitled, but I will say it's like wellness resort is what I call it. I was recently staying at a wellness resort retreat in the desert. I don't want to say the name because it's really a good place. It's like one of those places where white women go to do yoga and eat organic food and get massages. They also have a lot of things there that would be maybe considered mysticism, like spiritual healers, Reiki, crystal work, etc. You can put paint on a horse. I don't know, lots of spiritual stuff. So I'm there for a few days with my mom and a friend, and we're staying in a casita. So there's like the main house, the guest house, and a courtyard between them, all inside a walled metal gate. A big part of being there is you do lots of spa treatments and activities and healing and stuff on your own schedule, so you're alone a lot, even if you come with other people, just because your schedules don't overlap. In my alone time, I did a lot of trail running. I just went out into the desert. It's super isolated. Just went out and ran for an hour or so. On my last run, though, I just kept getting these feelings like I was being watched. It's the desert, so there's big rocks and brush, and I keep looking back over my shoulder, or I would go around a corner and brace myself like I was gonna have to have a fight, and then nothing. General desert creepiness. So that night, I'm asleep in the guest house, and I wake up to drumming, like a legit drum circle, drumming with rhythm. And my sleepy brain is like, okay, this is a weird place. There could be a 1 a.m. drum circle, why not? So I lay there in bed listening to the drumming, and I'm getting more and more angry, like the emotion was pure rage. When people see they say red, that was how I felt. So I'm in my pajamas, and I crawl out of bed and angrily stomp on my sneakers, and the only thing I can come up with was going outside and yelling, "Shut the fuck up." I cannot overestimate how not in my right mind I was. I was just completely filled with rage. I would never, ever stomp around a luxury resort yelling at people to shut up, but I was filled with such rage. I was like a woman possessed. I know that sounds crazy, but I was ready to walk into the desert in only my pajamas to stop the drum circle. So I leave the house and I stomp over to the gate to exit the courtyard and go outside, and the moment I put my hand to the handle of the gate, this voice speaks to me really calmly and clearly and says, "The thing that's trying to lure you outside in the dark is not the thing you want to meet." And it's like it broke the spell, like a switch switch flipped. I went back inside and I laid back down in bed. I went from being like red hot to ice cold, and the drumming had stopped. No sound, nothing. I asked everyone the next morning. I was like, what was with that drum circle? And no one had heard anything. I checked the resort schedule and there wasn't anything scheduled. I have no explanation, but I'm glad I didn't go outside. Okay, this last story is also untitled, but I'm calling it Thrift Haul. A very self-explanatory title. Very simple title. Okay, this is by far the freakiest thing that has ever happened to me. A lot of my friends and family live in pretty dispersed parts of the country, and every so often I go on road trips in order to visit them. My job gives me the freedom to take pretty lengthy trips, which is great because I'm obsessed with thrift shopping. So I sometimes plan out a route that lets me hit up a bunch of small town thrift stores to see if I can score any gems. It makes the traveling part of these trips a lot more fun, which while I do a little bit of thrift flipping on the side on Poshmark, I mostly just look for myself. My collection of vintage dresses and hats and jewelry is absurd. It's an addiction. This was in the summer, and I had just dyed my hair a reddish auburn color from its usual blonde. I was really feeling the new look and excited about how different colors and styles might work with it. So I set up on my phone a route through certain small town thrift stores that I had read about online. I had already made a few cool scores on the first and second day before visiting my sister. After that, as I headed further south, that's where the story gets crazy. I was in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, heading to a small town that I won't name, but which had a large church-affiliated thrift store that I was planning to spend a few hours at. When I arrived in the parking lot, I had a good feeling just because of how big the store was. I walked in, and within 5 minutes, I started finding the most amazing vintage clothing, like late 70s, early 80s, all kind of clustered together and all very feminine. Knit skirts, flowy floral dresses, little sweaters, blouses. When I tried them on, they all fit perfectly, which is kind of amazing because I'm pretty petite and I have to alter vintage stuff a lot of times. I was convinced that these outfits must have belonged to the same person because they were all of such a distinctive quality and era. I was super excited, and I looked through every rack in the store to see if I could find anything else that was similar, and I did find a few more items, like a vintage straw purse, but most of the store was contemporary t-shirts and kids' clothes, so those amazing vintage pieces really stood out. They're also super cheap, like $4 a dress. Make a score. I had spent so long in there that I decided this was the town where I was going to spend the night. I ordered Chinese to go, got a hotel room, and spent the evening eating lo mein and trying on different outfits and playing around with accessories while a movie was on in the background. The next morning, I was so excited to wear what I considered the star of my thrift haul. And side note, besides this being the freakiest thing that ever happened to me, it's also my best thrift haul ever. So, the star of my haul was kind of like Little House on the Prairie-esque long floral dress with slight puff sleeves. I felt like some kind of casual tea-time princess wearing it, so I clipped my newly auburn hair to the side, put my phone and lip balm in the just-acquired straw purse, and after packing up the car, I headed out to get breakfast somewhere. This was one of those towns that had a diner where everyone goes in the morning. The parking lot was jam-packed. I figured they would have pretty good coffee, so I decided this was going to be where I went to get breakfast. I pushed the glass doors, and when I walked in, you know that feeling when it seems like everyone's staring at you? Well, as soon as I stepped in, the sound of the place, which had just been buzzing with different voices, noticeably dropped, and I felt all these eyes on me. It wasn't the usual let's gawk at a pretty girl sort of thing either. It felt different, almost unfriendly. It was unnerving. But a sign said, please seat yourself, so I slid into a booth and picked up a menu. I was contemplating my order when the waitress came over, an older woman in her probably late 60s. "Coffee, honey," she said. I put down the menu, looked up with a smile, and said, "Yes, please." I've never seen the color drain from someone's face before, but when I looked up at her, I saw her lips go white. She screamed and dropped the coffee pot she was holding, which smashed into the floor, hot coffee and glass going everywhere. And she kept screaming over and over, staring right at me. I was stunned. Eventually someone took her by the arm and ushered her away toward the kitchen, where I could still hear her screaming. Every single person in the diner was staring at me now. A mother got up and clutched her children's faces against her, as if, to keep them from looking at me, and left the diner. Other people were getting up and leaving too, and one woman made the sign of the cross, staring at me before she did. I didn't move. I started saying, "I'm sorry," which didn't make sense, because of course I hadn't done anything, but no one looked at me like they were going to offer any encouraging words. I was gonna get up and leave myself, but with all the other people still going through the door, I just sat there. From the back kitchen, an older man came out, and he appeared to be the short order cook because he was wearing an apron. He brought me a mug of coffee and stared right at me. "Sorry about that, ma'am," he said. "She's just had a death in the family, and she isn't herself." He stood there for a few seconds, just looking at me, while I tentatively sipped the coffee, still in shock, and then he said, "Do you mind if I ask your name?" I told him, and his face seemed to visibly relax. "So it's not Franny?" I told him it most certainly was not Franny. He stood there, looking at me intently. I could see from his face that he was quite old, older than I first thought. "Well, you look a lot like her," he said, and he gestured towards my dress. "That's her May Queen outfit." I looked down in confusion at my dress. I told him I had just bought it at the thrift store in town the day before. He nodded like that made sense and asked for my order, saying it was on the house. I could still hear the woman in the kitchen, who was crying and moaning now, no longer screaming. So I made my order, and he came back with a mop and cleaned up the mess near my foot, the coffee in the glass, and he brought out my pancakes and eggs after that. The noise in the diner went up a little as the remaining diners began talking to each other again, and a few new ones came in, but I could still see them shooting furtive glances at me. Eventually, I realized I could no longer hear the waitress crying, although she never came back into the dining area. As I finished my meal, the short order cook asked if he could sit down with me. He asked me where I was from, and I told him, and he asked me what I was doing here, and I told him. I asked him what he meant about what he said before when he asked if my name was Franny. He never took his eyes off me as he spoke. He told me that over 30 years ago, a sweet, pretty girl, my niece actually, he said, who looked very much like you, she was murdered, strangled, and her body was found in a nearby field. No one was ever charged, but some people suspected her on and off boyfriend, but no evidence was ever found. She had been the May Queen in the town's parade the months before she died, and she was going to college at UGA in the fall, but she never got the chance. The whole town never forgot her or her murder. My wife, he said, gesturing to the kitchen where the waitress had gone. She just lost her older sister, who was Franny's mother, a few weeks ago. So she's a little skittish right now, and seeing you is like seeing a ghost. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "I'm sorry." We realized that Franny's clothes, which her mother had kept all these decades, must have been recently donated to the thrift store after she died. That's why there were so many great outfits that fit me so well. It's strange, too, to think that if I hadn't just dyed my hair, I probably wouldn't have made nearly the same impression, as Franny's hair had been reddish auburn, too. "Can I ask you a favor?" he asked as our conversation was wrapping up. "Okay," I said. "See that auto shop on the corner?" he said. I said, "Yeah." He said, "If you don't mind, I'd really like to walk with you into that shop and say hello to the owner." For some reason, I didn't really ask any questions, so I just said okay. He nodded and got up and got a younger guy from the kitchen to come out to the diner while he was gone, then grabbed his coat and we walked towards the auto shop together. I could feel everyone in the diner looking at us as we left. When we were close enough to be going inside the shop, I asked, "Who are we meeting?" "Franny's boyfriend," he said, and without thinking I walked forward as he held the door open for me. There was no one in the room and we stepped inside. The cook walked up to the empty front desk and rang a bell and we waited. Then a guy came out from the back garage area. He was portly and bald and probably in his mid-50s and wiping his hands with a rag. "Hi, Randall," the cook said. Something about how he said the name Randall seemed weighted with meaning. The man looked surprised but nodded. Then he looked at me. Never as long as I live will I forget his face. He stared at me, his expression changing into one of pure horror. "Jesus fucking Christ," he said. Then he closed his eyes and wiped the rag over his face, which left a dark grease mark on his forehead. When he opened his eyes again, he repeated, "Jesus fucking Christ." Then he said, "Franny." We hadn't talked about what I was supposed to do or say, so I just nodded. He started trembling all over, and then he started crying, saying, "Forgive me, Franny, forgive me." He fell to his knees. The cook took my arm, and we turned around and walked out, leaving him there. When we were close to the diner again, the cook turned to me and said, "That might not be good enough for the law, but that's good enough for me. Thank you." I told him I was going to leave now, and he said, "Hang on, one more thing." So I waited near my car, wondering what was next. Then he came out, handed me a paper bag, and said thank you again. He was kind of crying when he pulled back. Then he stood outside the diner and waved at me as I drove away. I opened the bag when I got to a stoplight, and inside there was an egg salad sandwich, a pickle, and a bag of chips. Sometimes I still can't believe all that really happened. The rest of the trip passed in a blur of visiting and thrifting. I told everyone I spent time with about what happened, and they could hardly believe it, but it's true, every single word. Not that long ago, I happened to put on one of the knit skirts from that vintage haul. Yeah, I still wear all the clothes. They're beautiful. And I realized there was a pocket I hadn't noticed. I stuck my hand in it, and I found a piece of paper. It was a dry cleaning slip with a date 3/19/79, and at the bottom was written in a blue pen, "Francesca." I keep it in my jewelry box in a place of honor. So that is the last story for tonight. That one is not too scary, I hope.